session. It'll end up as a YouTube video, and I'll send the link to the YouTube video, Barbara's handouts, and Barbara's slides in the next couple days, along with your RUs. Um, we had originally a live presentation at the Regent, and that kind of fell apart, and Barbara agreed to step in. And Barbara A. Boldt is Executive Communication Skills Coach and Principal at Boldt Global. The bio, I think, was in our meeting invite, but Barbara is a transformative communication coach who empowers introverted leaders, which is kind of the definition of all the engineers I've ever worked with, to become authentic, impactful communicators. Through her unique approach, she combines anxiety reduction techniques with strategic communication skills training to help clients move from feeling unseen to confidently representing themselves and their organizations. Barbara has 20 years plus experience working internationally with professionals from 35 countries, has an extraordinary ability to identify why a message is not connecting, whether it's due to unclear language, structure, delivery. She helps clients reshape how they communicate. Barbara has an MA in International Relations from University of Pacific in Stockton, California, a BA in Nutrition from University of Iowa. I need some help there. Barbara is a 2024 graduate of Heroic Grad Public Speaking Program and resides in Southeast Michigan with her partner, Robert. So that's Barbara's intro. Your slides are being shared. I will probably shut off my video so I don't burn up all of our bandwidth, and I'll let you get to it. We typically, like we talked before, go to close to 7-ish.
Okay.
You're one of the 2 speakers a year that are in the unfortunate position of being up against a national championship sporting event. So
Right.
I think it'll mostly affect how grumpy I am about our officers meeting that we have starting at 7:10. But other than that, you have the floor, and I appreciate it. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much, Don. Thank you for that intro. I'll be telling you a little bit more about how I gained my experience as we get into the presentation, but I'm not going to belabor that point. I'm thrilled to be here. I love virtual presentations for the fact that people can come from all over. So I find that really exciting that don't just maybe have a local audience, but we have an audience from different parts of the country and maybe even different parts of the world. And that's definitely right up my alley. I was happy to step in tonight. I think the woman who was going to speak before has a slightly different topic, but I find that teaching people how to create a persuasive message, which is basically what a pitch is useful for a lot of people. It's useful in almost any context. For you in the quality space, no doubt you are having to sell people on the need to either make a change or increase quality or spend some money possibly on upgrading or making changes. So I hope that what I have to share with you this evening, you will find useful. And I am sharing a set of worksheets that will take you through how you construct this type of a message. It's a lot to learn, and in 50 minutes, you're not going to be an expert at that. However, I'm going to take you through the process, and you will have those worksheets to use if you want to give it a try for your next presentation. The next time you have to ask for resources, basically. So the idea is that communication is a vital tool. And as we all know, communication is a vital tool. We can't get anything done without communicating. But this particular type of communication that we're going to look at this evening is a great way to be able to gain support for your quality initiatives in particular, but really for almost any initiative that you might be trying to find resources for. Communication can be used in a lot of different ways. So that some of the ways you can use communication to just raise awareness about an issue, about a new project. I would refer to that type of communication as informative. We are informing people if we are raising awareness. But the next 3 ways we can use communication actually speak to this idea of persuasive communication. So if you think about it, if we're encouraging people to change their behavior, which I can imagine in quality work is something that you do, That requires persuasion. You've got to convince people that they should change their behavior. Also, if we're trying to engage a stakeholder or stakeholders, why should they care? Why should they back our initiative? That also requires persuasive communication. And last but not least is this whole idea of trying to get the resources that you need. It could be money, it could be people, it could be time, it could be a lot of different things, but people have to be on board in order to consider going along with you and giving you what you need. So that's what we're going to really cover this evening, is this idea of, I find that in technical fields, and that could be quality, that could be the engineering world. I'm actually speaking on Friday to a group of project managers. All you folks are really good at presenting data and numbers and possibly like words. But when it comes to actually motivating people to get them to do what you want to do, that can be something that you may not ever have been trained in. So that's what we're really all about this evening, is figuring out what is this whole area of communication that has to do with getting people to do what we want them to do. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about me. Don did a great job of giving you my bio. What I want to communicate here, and you'll notice this picture is of Italy. Everything I know about communication, I basically learned abroad. You heard that I have a nutrition degree, which was my undergraduate degree. And basically today that serves me in reading labels, which I'm very good at. However, so I moved abroad in my mid-30s. I expatriated myself to Europe. It's one of those stories where I went on a vacation to Italy, met a guy, not an unusual story in that context, went back to live with the guy. It was an utter disaster. It didn't last very long, but I fell in love with learning to speak a language where you can speak it. And I decided I was going to find a way to stay, even though the relationship failed. This was all many, many years ago. And you could fly under the radar in foreign countries a lot easier than you can today, if anybody's wondering how I made that happen. However, I ended up living in Europe for 20 years. I spent 11 years in Italy, 8 years in Switzerland, and that is where I learned my communication skills. I learned how to speak. I'm fluent in Italian. I can speak French passably. My German has gotten worse over the years. So I learned other languages, and then I taught my own. And it was really that experience of helping non-native English speakers communicate their messages clearly in English that gave me what I consider to be that superpower, which is really hearing things that are out of alignment or could flow better in even communication from people whose first language is English. So I won't belabor that story anymore. Although I did move back for love, you might be interested to know that. However, we will move on with our presentation now that you've had that tweak. We're going to just talk for a minute here about our audience. When we are pitching to, we're obviously pitching to a group of people, and we need to try to find out as much as we can about that audience. We need to really think through, who are these people? So we want to ask ourselves, who is my audience? And the kinds of things we want to know are hierarchical level, possibly. Are there decision makers in the room? Maybe we want to know about language background, cultural background that could have an influence. We definitely want to know what their interest is in what we're presenting, and why should they care? That's kind of what the bottom line is. So any presentation that you give, the first focus should really be on your audience, because that's who the presentation is for. Some people come at a presentation from, what do I want to say? But it's really, what do they need to know, that we want to be asking ourselves. The other thing we want to ask in the case of a persuasive type of communication is, what do I want or need this audience to do? Do I want them to give me money? Do I want them to just get on board with what I'm pitching here? So we have to figure out what we want them to do. And then we have to ask the question, what does this group of people need to know and understand in order for them to get what I need and what I want. So this is kind of the background piece. We can call it putting people in the picture. And the real art, I would say, to doing this is not too little and not too much. You've got to kind of nail it from the perspective of not overwhelming your audience, but you have to tell them enough that they understand why you need what you need. So there can be some experimentation maybe that goes on there about how much is too much, how much is too little. I will say that most people err in the technical world on the side of too much. The Italians were the only ones I ever trained that gave almost nothing sometimes. And then the last question we want to ask ourselves is, why should they be listening to me? What is in this for them? Why do they care? And if we don't ask ourselves that, we really run the risk of boring the pants off of people. You have to think about, okay, why should they be listening to me? And we have to create our presentation in such a way that they get that they know that you've thought about it. That's the real key. So maybe they care about beating the competition. Maybe they care about complying with a regulation. Maybe they care about a scarce, conserving a scarce resource or something like that. But you do need to think through, what will people care about? There are some other questions that we can consider this, and in the quality world, and maybe some of the context in which you work, you need to think about the organizational context and possible constraints to doing what you have in mind. You could anticipate objections and concerns, and it's a good idea to try to incorporate some of the counteractions to those objections and concerns in your presentation or in your pitch. And then you might also want to think about the tone you need to use. It could vary from really serious to maybe more upbeat, but enthusiastic. You might need to get a little cheerleader action in on the topic. Optimism versus pessimism, all of those things can come through in our voice. So thinking about the tone that you want your presentation to take, how you want people to hear what you say, is also a useful thing to consider before you start. Now here comes the slide that I'm going to ask Don to read some stuff in the chat. If you want to put into the chat, what is a pitch to you? I ask this question because it's very interesting to see what people say. So just in the chat, put down what pitch means to you.
I started by saying I was a validation manager, and if I have a predicted reliability problem, a butt of a problem, a failure that happens out of warranty, I would have to present that to leadership and top leadership to start to gather resources, money to solve it.
So that was when you called that a pitch. You knew you were going to pitch.
I would call it a pitch, yeah.
Absolutely. What else do we have coming in?
Moses says a proposed value proposition in order to get buy-in or investment.
Good. Yep.
Pitch is a sales effort from Steve.
Yep. Is anybody putting anything related to being sleazy in there?
Not yet. A very quick statement in a short period of time.
Yep. Time limited. Absolutely.
Barbara, I'll send you a Malcolm Gladwell thing that I found about people that sold knives on the boardwalk in Atlantic City.
Okay.
They talked about the pitch, the turn, the tip, all the Carney terminology. So
cool.
Very interesting and applicable. So I'll find it.
Yeah.
Anyway, very quick statement in a short period of time from Emily. James Warden says a case to make a change in SOPs. That's a good one, I think.
Yeah.
An ask that accompanies mutually beneficial outcomes from Rajiv.
Okay. Ask is good. I love that word.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like everybody has some idea about what a pitch is.
Yeah, proposal with justification that's tailored to the audience. That's from Deepak. So
okay.
That's quite a few.
Yeah, that is quite a few. Yeah, I usually ask this question to see what keywords we get out, and we've got the ask has come out, time limited has come out. I think you guys have a good understanding. So I will show you the definition that I typically use, and so it typically is short. I consider the cutoff between pitch and presentation to be somewhere between 15 and 20 minutes. If you have to get your point across in 15 minutes or less, you're pitching. If you have half an hour or longer, it's more of a presentation. And that simply means you'll probably include more information and more data. But in a time limited type of communication, we have to be very focused. And we do want to combine information with persuasive elements. And that's really what we're going to speak about tonight is what's the difference? How do we go from just informing people to actually motivating them to want to do something about the situation? The persuasive elements are the way that we connect with that audience. And we can't really motivate an audience without them feeling something. We've got to have some type of connection feeling going on. And that might sound touchy-feely in a corporate context. However, we're all human, even if we're at work. So we have to use these elements, and we'll talk about what those specific elements are in just a moment. So we have this whole balancing act we have to do between the information that we share, which is the what. And of course, we have to tell people what we're talking about. We can't not have any information in a pitch. But what we definitely don't want is too much information. I often say that a pitch is designed to be the initiation of a conversation. You really want to intrigue people when you're in a pitch situation so that they want to know more. If you dump all the information on them at the beginning, they can become overwhelmed, they can shut down, and they cannot understand why they need to know all this stuff yet. So we've got to also share with them the why. And the why is this more emotional, passionate type of message, but it's the reason for the change you want to make or the solution that you're proposing. And we're going to take a look at how you structure those two elements within the pitch. But I generally say that in a pitch context, you want to be to the right of center. You need more persuasion than just information. Info, data, statistics, all that kind of thing is great, and it can back up your why. However, that's not the stuff that typically convinces people to take an action. So we're going to look at what is it that motivates people. What does compel people to act? And I think this is really interesting stuff. The first on the list, it's not necessarily in order. However, honesty or the perception of honesty is very important. And honesty leads to this third word, which emotional connection also leads to, is this whole idea of trust. People have to trust that you are capable of doing what you say you're going to do and that you're trustworthy to do what you say you're going to do. If they're giving you money to do something, they want to know that you're going to use that money in the correct way. So those are three things that motivate people to act. Information does play a role, can play a role in compelling people to act. So new information or a new perspective on something people already know can have an impact on compelling people to take an action. The key thing to keep in mind is that people do not act when they are confused. And this is the risk you take if you overwhelm people with too much information. They will simply not be able to ask because they are kind of information paralyzed. So you've got to keep what you share very clear, pretty simple. And when you ask someone, when you have your ask at the end of a pitch, and a pitch is not a pitch without an ask, one clear thing that you need people to do. You don't want a laundry list of everything you need them to do because they will become paralyzed. They will not be able to make a decision. They will not be able to move forward. So simplicity, clarity, honesty, and this building of trust are the things that you want to remember when you need people to take an action. I'm going to very briefly talk about the types of pitches. Of course, there's the famous elevator pitch. And frankly, this is a super important type of pitch. Everybody needs a 1.5 to 2 minute version of their longer pitch, because you will be in circumstances where you have to very quickly tell people what you're doing and pitch them on your idea. Oftentimes we think of this elevator pitch as being used in a networking context where we're in two-way communication with another person. And I think that's valid in most cases. So in that case, it's not like you're going to blurt out all 1.5 minutes of your pitch. You're going to deliver it in pieces and allow people to ask you questions. So it's, your pitch won't be delivered like it would be on a stage or in a meeting context. You leave room or space for your interlocutor or the other person you're speaking with to get involved in the conversation. But it's really good to have that distilled version of your pitch, because there will be moments when you don't have 5 to 15 minutes. So you got to get it down. The business pitch, I just use business as a word to indicate that this is your average general full service pitch. This is the pitch you use the most. This is the pitch you deliver in the meeting. This is typically a one-way communication. You utilize slides. It's delivered to an audience. Even if you're not on a stage, you could just be standing in a meeting room. So this is your real pitch. And typically you could be given 5 to 10 minutes. You could maybe even be given as many as 15 minutes to deliver this type of pitch, but you definitely need to have both. I recommend people starting with the longer pitch, building out the longer pitch, and then shrinking it to come up with your elevator pitch. I recommend that simply because I think you get more richness when you build out the longer pitch. You get more vocabulary, you get more words, you get more context. And then when you're shrinking it, you can look very carefully at what's essential. What do people have to know here? But if you just try to build the short pitch first, the elevator pitch, you can leave stuff out, and you might not be getting the richest variety of words that will communicate most effectively. That is one thing, because of my background, because of having lived abroad and I'm very linguistically oriented. So I do talk a lot about vocabulary, and there may be a slide later that says words matter. I don't know if that one's in here or not. So in any communication situation, be it a pitch or another type of presentation, we always have our content and we have our delivery. I used to believe that delivery was really way more important than content, but over time I have modified that. I do believe that good content can be delivered badly, and that's always unfortunate. However, you got to have the meat. You've got to have the content. So I now put a lot more emphasis on helping people develop that message, and then we work on delivering that most effectively. These are what I consider to be the essential elements of a business pitch. You will see other lists, you will see other ways of thinking about this, but over time, this is sort of the way I have defined it. So we do have our overview phrase, which is basically our introduction. And this can also be your one sentence pitch. It's who you are, title, role, department, whatever your context might be, the solution you're proposing or what it is that you do, briefly, with not a lot of detail, high level, and then who that solution benefits. So that target audience or the target client, if you will. That's what you want to have in your overview phrase. We then get to what we're going to concentrate on this evening, which is what I call the heart of the pitch. This is the problem you solve, the solution you're proposing, and the difference that solution makes. I call this the heart of the pitch because every pitch you give, be it the longer one or the shorter one, has to have a version of these three things very closely tied together. You want to package the problem solution transformation. And if you can nail this, if you can get this down, it then sustains everything else that you say. It helps people understand the problem, understand the solution. And this is where the worksheets come in. We're going to work our way through how do we create this nice, tight heart of the pitch. We then also will talk about who that solution benefits. It's nice to include something in a pitch about where you are in your process, what you're working on right now, what phase are you in of development of this solution, that kind of thing. It makes it seem active and like things are happening. So that's why you want to include that. It may be that you want to include who's on your team. That's obviously dependent on the situation. But then you get to your ask. And this ask, as I said, a pitch is not a pitch without an ask. So you have to ask. And we'll cover how you do that a little bit later. The thing that a lot of people, a mistake that people make is too long of a conclusion in the context of a pitch. Basically, you want your ask to remain in the mind of your listener. So you don't want to clog up their mind with a whole bunch of other stuff after you've made your ask. So actually, your overview phrase or your intro can also be your exit. You can just say, I am so-and-so from this department. This is what we're working on. Please support us. Something simple like that, so that you don't want to go on very long after you've made your ask. And then, of course, generally there will be a Q&A. And the last slide I have in this deck is about how to manage a Q&A session. We may not get to that this evening. We'll see how long this goes on. But if I don't get to cover it, it's pretty self-explanatory. So you will have that in the deck that I share with you. Are there any questions in the chat, Don?
Not right now.
Okay, feel free to put a question in the chat if anybody has one. If you guys have questions, and then Don can interrupt me, then I can answer.
Matthew Delane came in later with a pitch is seeking to not just communicate information, but through that communication drive action or response. Moses says, what are the biggest pitfalls to avoid?
Pitfalls are too much information. That's a big one. Front loading info before you have gotten people's interest. I think that's one of the biggest pitfalls in creating a pitch that really doesn't get a response. And there may be some more that we cover as we go along here. That's a great question, Moses. And the other gentleman, that was a great description of a pitch. So thank you. Thank you for that. So we're going to dive into this heart of the pitch idea. And what you'll see here is that we have our problem, which is where we start. We then go to solution, and transformation is the outcome over here. What you'll see when we get to the story part is that this form here that the heart of the pitch takes is very similar to a story structure. And we're going to spend a little bit of time on story this evening. But we want this, we want to linguistically connect the three pieces here. So that's why we start with vocabulary, which we'll get to in just a minute. So these are some key concepts related to pitching. And the first part of it is what we want this pitch to be. We need it to be clear. We want it to be impactful, which is the fact that we capture people's attention. We want it to be memorable. We want people to remember what we've said once they leave the room. And we want it to be actionable. We want them to do something after they have heard our pitch. And what we want them to do really is ask a bunch of questions. We want our audience to be very curious by the time we come to the end of that pitch. So how do we accomplish this? How do we create this piece of communication that fulfills all these goals? The how is thinking very carefully about our vocabulary. And I'm going to talk about this more in a minute, but we need to pay attention to the words we're using. We need to know how to structure this message. And we've seen that our structure basically in the heart part is that problem, then solution, then transformation. I'm sure some of you have attended pitches or heard pitches where it's all about the solution. And the reason that's problematic is because until people know what the problem is, the solution doesn't make a lot of sense. So you really need to build out your problem before you get to telling people about your solution. The next two words have to do with the way we use language. We need to be very consistent in the way we describe things. If your solution is technical and has, a way that something works in it, you need to describe that the same way every time. Sometimes people with deep technical knowledge can describe how something works 6 different ways. If you do that, especially with a non-technical audience, you're going to lose them. So consistency in the way you use language and the way you describe things is really important in a short communication. Repetition is important. We need to say things more than once for people to keep what we've said. I think it's 7 to 16 times. In a 10-minute pitch, you're not going to say something 16 times. Obviously, that would be a broken record type of experience. However, do not be afraid to say things more than once, because people, we're all distracted and we have too much on our minds these days. So you've got to tell people more than once. Story is the element of a pitch that does create audience connection and drive emotion. So story is our key persuasive element in any type of pitch. And we are going to talk a little bit more about story. And I'm not talking Hansel and Gretel and breadcrumbs here. I am talking a relevant story. And I do have some examples that I'll share with you. And then images will communicate more effectively than word slides in the context of a pitch. Because as you know, and you're doing it right now, you're reading my word slide. Are you listening to what I'm saying? Maybe not. So we don't want to distract our audience with words on a slide and lots of small print to read, because they won't be listening to us. And persuasion is best done with your voice, with body language, with eye contact. That's how we persuade people, not with words on a slide. So keep in mind that images are going to serve you better. So let's get to this whole thing of structure. We're back to the heart of the pitch here. And what I want to this slide has a little bit of additional information. We start with story. When we have a problem that we want to describe it. And if we tell a story about someone who suffers from that problem or who has encountered that problem, we can paint a very visual picture of what goes wrong and what that problem is. And I'm going to share some examples as we get into this. But the real message I want you to see here is that we start with story, we end with story, and in the middle, we implant some information about our solution. The reason this is important and that I pointed out is because the brain is also attracted by difference. So if we change up the way that we're communicating with our audience, from going from a story format, we then shoot in some information, some data, some facts, but then we go back to the story, it's interesting for people. It's interesting to listen to. Pardon me. So this is the reason that we have this story, info, story formula that we follow when we're creating our pitch. Obviously, when you get to marketing or other data-oriented topics in your pitch, you're going to have more information. But it's the story that's going to engage. So that's why you need a story. And we'll talk a little bit about the type of story. So now we're going to get to my favorite topic, which is language. We're going to talk about vocabulary. This is another pitfall, Moses. Oftentimes people are so close to their topic, they are such experts in what they do, that they don't have the ability to step back far enough to realize what language is going to communicate with an audience that has less knowledge than they do. So you have to be careful about how you describe things, what words you use. They have to be accessible to the people listening. And you can imagine that if you're pitching to upper management for funds or resources for a project, not all of them might have your background. Not all of them might be quality experts. So think about use of acronyms. You want to generally reduce the use of acronyms. You want your language to be specific and accurate. We want to really cut out words like stuff, bunch, a lot, that, them, those. if you think about the English language, there are a lot of words that are very non-specific. And that's the kind of language we want to avoid in a pitch context. Because we are time limited, every word matters. Every word has to carry as much meaning as it can to get our message across. So think about that meaningful and descriptive language. It can also be colorful. It can also be evocative, meaning that it evokes emotion. But we really want to be very specific and accurate. A tip for figuring out what this language should be is to write down everything. Well, yeah, we're going to get to that here. So our first step is we describe our solution. And I typically have people do this in paragraph form. So just write out everything you feel that people need to know about your solution. And then try to identify those words that you feel are getting your message across clearly. And if you're struggling with that, give your message to somebody who knows nothing about what you do. Give it to your grandmother or, whoever, but get input from someone who's not an expert and who does not know your field, because they are the ones who are going to help you understand if you're being clear or not. When I do coaching, I often say to my client, I'm the stranger in the room. I don't know your business. I don't know everything that you know. You've got to make me understand it. That language that you use to describe whatever has to be accessible to me. It can't be something I've got to, go look up. So that is our first step, is figuring out what is the language that will get our message across. This is an example, and I'm not going to belabor this. You will see this when you get the slides, but it is an example from a client that I worked with who makes sustainable pallets. And it's simply showing you what words, the words that are most critical, are in the blue. So we've got sustainable, strong, durable, ordered less frequently. In his case, these are words that communicate his message clearly. And yours obviously will be different. But the key is that you got to identify those words. In the interest of time, I'm going to move on. I know this seems complicated. However, if you practice it a little bit, it does make sense. We then want to get very, very clear about how our solution connects to the problems that it solves. And I have people do this backwards, because the real key thing is that your audience get what your solution is. But if you build out a robust problem story that includes all of the different aspects of the solution, your solution then has a place to land in the mind of your listener. So you can, I use the coat tree analogy. We're looking for places for your solution to hang in the mind of your listener. By talking about the problem and including all of those pieces, we create an awareness of our listener. And when we get to the solution, they go, aha, yes, I totally understand. Now, I do have an example of this because I know it seems very abstract. But if we think, so this is Raj again in his pallets. The solution that he's offering are bamboo fibers, which are very strong, and they don't break under heavy loads. The problem this solves, pardon me, related to wooden pallets, is that wood is weak. It splinters and breaks apart easily and exposes the nails. They make a mess. These broken wooden pallets make a mess and create hazardous working conditions. Now, I am going to share with you the story that I've created for Raj. And when you read his story, you're going to see all of the solutions included in his problem story. This is fast, so I apologize that it kind of probably seems a little bit incomprehensible. But, a second thing here is that the bamboo fibers are durable. It doesn't splinter. They last longer and have to be ordered less frequently. So what we want to be doing here is creating the connection so that and actually the next slide tells us the purpose of this exercise. We want to create an outline for a robust problem story. You don't just want a one-line problem statement, because it gives no context. It doesn't evoke emotion. We want to make sure we don't leave anything out so that we can talk about all of the elements of our solution. If we just throw out elements of our solution, our audience has nothing to relate it to. We want a robust problem story, because then the audience understands the context and what the problem is and why our solution is so great. Because look at this problem, this huge problem that it solves. So we are creating basically landing pads in the mind of our listeners when we try to have a place in the mind of our listener for every piece of our solution to hang. And the reason we want to do this is actually because if we build out a robust problem statement, it gives us a lot to talk about when we get to the benefits. When we get to that transformation, how the world is different, how the situation is different with our solution enacted, wow, we've got a lot to build on, because we have built out all the pieces of the problems that our solution solves. And it allows us to sell our solution more forcefully, more strongly. So that's the reason why we want to go to all this effort, because I'm sure some of you are like, oh my God, I had no idea. All right, so now we get to story. And the reason we want to include story in our pitch is because it allows us to paint this picture of the problem that we solve. It creates connection with our audience. It allows us to go deep into the pain points. So we don't want to just say that our audience, has a problem like, okay, we'll use wooden pallets. Wooden pallets break. Yes, they do. But what are the consequences of those wooden pallets breaking? It can be somebody stepping on a nail. It can be people getting splinters. It can be a chaotic workplace where there's just all this stuff all over the floor all the time. Those are pain points that workers in that context deal with. So the story about a particular person can help us understand help us get to that emotional level. It helps us to evoke emotion, and it can also showcase your passion for your solution. Now, the thing that I want to help you understand is that talking in generalities is not nearly as attractive to the brain as talking in specificities. And that basically means you want to tell a story about one person, a group of people, a small group of people, maybe a family. It depends on the situation. And you want to give those people names. Audiences relate to names of people, and they will remember the names. So it may seem silly that we're going to tell a story about Mark, who's the warehouse manager who has this problem with wooden pallets, but in fact, that's what your audience is going to twig on. That's what they're going to tune into. So when you see, I'm going to send out another set of papers afterwards that give you the example that will help you see how this works. You'll notice that there's a very specific story about a warehouse manager. His name might not be Mark, it might be Kevin, who has all of the problems that Raj's pellets solve. And that's the key thing, is to get everything in there. Now, here's the slide that you'll notice the comparison with the heart of the pitch. Many of you have probably heard of the hero's journey story template. It's very famous. It was made famous by that one guy whose name, of course, will not come to me in this moment. Bill. Yeah, you know who I mean. I think he's gone now, actually. However, this is a very common and effective story structure to use in a pitch context. So we have the out of nowhere comes the problem. There's a problem that cannot be ignored, and it gets worse. So the situation goes from bad to worse until our protagonist, who is our target client or target person who's going to benefit, it's not us. We are not the hero. They are the hero. They hit rock bottom. They just don't know what else to do. Kevin's tearing his hair out in this warehouse because so many people are getting injured, and he's having to order pallets every other day. They're breaking all over the place, and he's spending a ton of money on these wooden pallets. This is the point at which your hero discovers your solution. And this is the little point at which we introduce information and possibly data. We change up the way we're communicating and we say, then Kevin met Raj and Raj told him all about his biocomposite pallets. And for Kevin, this solves this huge problem and Raj becomes his way out. And in the transformation part of the pitch, we tell people how Kevin's life is better now, how the company's life is better now, what are the benefits of our solution. And because we've painted such a dire picture of this problem, oh my gosh, the solution seems like a miracle. So this is really what you want to do in a pitch, is develop this attractive, engaging story that helps people get the why they should support what it is you're asking them to do. Because, wow, look at the difference this is going to make. I'm going to have to go through these next slides a little quickly because I think we are about at the point, I probably have about 4 minutes left. I don't know if that's accurate, actually. 3 minutes, maybe. So there is another story template in here, and all I'm going to say is Nancy Duarte TED Talk. She is the woman who invented New Bliss. You could even put that in the chat, Dawn, if you want to write.
I'll find it and link it.
Okay, great. Nancy Duarte TED Talk will explain New Bliss in great detail. And the other key fact is Steve Jobs' 2007 iPhone introduction speech. It fits this template precisely. It works very well for new technology that has never been seen before. So, but Nancy will tell you all about that. In communicating our transformation, we're basically telling people what is the difference that the solution makes. There may be financial impact, which you would obviously want to include, benefits to stakeholders. So that is that end of our story. And we continue the story, whoever the names are that we've, Kevin's life is different now because he has these pallets made of biocomposite material. He doesn't have splintering going on. He's ordering pallets much less frequently. His warehouse is clean. His OSHA filings have gone way down, whatever the case might be. You continue the story in this case. We now come to ask. And the only thing I'm really going to say about this is use the word ask. When I use that word signposting is language that grabs your audience's attention, that tells them what is going to happen next. And usually it's really banal language like, that's all I have on this topic. Now I'm going to go on to, or the most famous example of signposting is in conclusion, right? Everybody perks up when you say in conclusion. So this signposting in the case of an ask is, my ask today is, or today I'm asking for. Don't beat around the bush and say, well, it'd be really nice if you kind of gave us. Yeah, our ask is today. You have to be very explicit and precise about what you're asking for. As we said before, you don't want it to be too much. It needs to be kind of one thing, maybe two. And this has to be delivered with impeccable delivery style. Conviction, eye contact, no moving around, no distracting body language, right? Straight on. Anytime you're talking about money or asking for something, you got to get real still and real serious, or people will not take you seriously. So how are we doing on time, Dawn?
Sorry, I took myself off mute. Yeah, I think it's not precise. I mean, we usually leave a few minutes at the end for Q&A, but right up to 7 is fine with me. I mean, and
I'll go through these last slides. These are delivery oriented. But before I do that, are there any questions in the chat about what we just went through? Because I know this is a lot.
Yeah, let me get back to the chat. I've been let's see. I don't have any new questions from the audience.
Okay.
I complained about electrical engineers and three-letter acronyms. So you were talking about acronyms. I gave kind of a reference to the Malcolm Gladwell book about Ron Popeil. He had a chapter in a book called What the Dog Saw, called The Pitchman.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And it was his structure, and how it came to be. I found Joseph Campbell, the book The Hero's Journey.
Yes. That Joseph Campbell.
That's the one.
I didn't have the name
Can you
right.
name any celebrities and/or politicians that are really good at the methods you just described? Steve Pekulski.
Um, well, Obama is really good as a speaker in general, but also I believe at being persuasive. Martin Luther King, of course, was the master. And in fact, in Nancy Duarte's video, her YouTube talk or her TED talk, she has also overlaid that new bliss formula onto Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech. Simon Sinek is very
Yep.
good at it's not what you know, it's not what you do, it's why you do it. You get nauseated by that by the end of his talk, typically. So those are a few that come to my mind. Trying to think of anybody else, but those would be the top ones I can think of in the moment. So you can check out their YouTube videos.
Yeah, I just reposted the link before. I don't know either of these links work, but the link I just posted was Nancy Duarte's TED Talk, and it had an image of your. It looked
That
like
same.
pulse width modulated. Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, that should be her. Interestingly, she's not that great of a speaker herself, but she has invented some really great things. So there you go. So we'll just
Yep.
briefly go through the slides on delivery. But when you, and I did not ever know that this quote was attributed to Mae West. But basically, what you have to think about is how you want to be perceived. What you do with your body and the nonverbals that you come across with all have to do with how your audience will perceive you. So generally, I talk about the 3 C's. You want to come across as credible, competent, and of course, confident. Confident is kind of that word that embodies the way that everybody wants to be seen. And the thing that everybody wants to have is that confidence. And the good news is you can build it. You can build confidence. If you're a nervous speaker or someone who gets nervous in front of a room, practicing, and there are lots of techniques I use with people to help them become more comfortable and more confident. But people have to believe what you say, and they have to believe you can do what you say. So those are our 3 C's. And there are some behaviors that support this. The first thing I always talk about is posture. We want to have a still body. And that's true also in this postage stamp that you have of me this evening. I hope I have not been wandering around and rocking. And yeah, sometimes you see people in a chair and they're swirling in the chair. You know, stay still. Have your body be as less of a distraction as possible. You want to be. I recommend feet hip distance apart, weight balanced evenly on both legs. And that sometimes I break that rule when I'm here on Zoom. I might jut out a hip, but if you're on a stage, you want to be straight. You don't want one hip out, because if your hip is out, you'll tilt your head and that just looks silly. So this erect posture, shoulders back, doesn't have to be necessarily like thrown back like in the military, but you want your arms to hang straight at your sides. But you definitely don't want to be crunched over or, folded in on yourself. Eye contact is critical, and I hope I've been maintaining it somewhat this evening. Given I can't see any of you, I can just look at my little green dot. Generally, when there are faces on the screen, it's harder to keep your focus on the green dot. But for example, if you were doing a virtual pitch to ask for money or resources or something like that, when you got to that ask, you would want to be looking right at the green dot. You would want to be hyper focused on your camera. Direct eye contact is the way that we connect with that audience. And we want to be looking at each, in person, if you're in a room with people, you want to make direct eye contact with each individual in the room, depending on the size of the audience, obviously, kind of randomly, like over here, then maybe down the middle. You don't want to go down the line of people sitting in a row because that looks a bit silly. However, 1 to 2, 2 to 3 seconds of eye contact with an individual, move on to making that kind of eye contact with another individual. So you do need to be looking at people. You do need to be making eye contact with people in order to impact them. If you're kind of looking around, or sometimes people say, oh, just look at a point on the wall in the back. That's not good advice. You're not connecting with your audience that way. You want your hand gestures to be as intentional as the rest of your posture and the rest of the way you're using your body. You want your gestures to be firm, intentional. We don't want waving of hands. We don't want clutching of hands. Count on your fingers. Think of ways that your hands can help you put across your verbal message. That's really what hands are for. And sometimes we have a clicker and we have a microphone and our hands are full, which is too bad because it really takes away a whole aspect of our communication ability. But we want our gestures to be intentional and firm. And that's the same for any kind of movement. If you are on a stage, you can move, but you need to make it look like you mean to go to that next place. And then you stay there. Pacing back and forth is a real no-no. Lower voice tone. I get accused of sexism when I say this. However, all of us listen more attentively to a lower voice tone. That's why dogs apparently obey men better than they obey women. Some people do have a higher voice pitch. If it's extreme, sometimes they need actual voice coaching to bring that down a bit. But it depends on the context and how seriously you need to be taken. Speed is huge. Anyone who rushes through a presentation of any kind is showing how nervous they are and how quickly they want it to be over. So you have to force yourself to speak more slowly. I hope I've been speaking in a relatively measured pace this evening, although when I get time crunch, I can tend to speed up a bit. However, generally you need to be speaking. The average is 135 words per minute for speakers, like people who are professional speakers. So if you are trying to time something, you can write out what you're going to say and divide by 35, and you'll get an approximation of how long your talk is. But generally slow down. Downward inflection is this whole thing of going down at the end of your phrases. Instead of, my name is Barbara Boldt, I'm a communication skills coach, my company is Boldt Global, maybe it all sounds questioning, right? Up intonation in English is a questioning intonation. So you want to go down at the end of the majority of your phrases. In fact, in English, we use rhetorical questions to change things up, right? So generally, downward inflection is more powerful. It will give you that power. And in the ask and in those moments when you really need the power, you want to go down at the end of your phrases. You need to be speaking loud enough for everyone in the room to hear you. If you have a mic, you don't have to worry about that. You should never shout, but you definitely want to project. And that comes from your diaphragm, which is another reason why you want to be standing up nice and straight or sitting up nice and straight. If you're seated, sit in a very upright position. And then, of course, we do speak in English in short sentences, one idea per phrase. This is more for some of my non-native English speaking clients. However, there are those of us who speak English as our mother tongue who can create really long sentences, and we can lose people. So intentional pauses. I consider pausing as advanced presentation skills. People who really master the art of the pause are people who really take their speaking very seriously. Pauses can serve two purposes. You can either pause right before you're going to say something important to create that silence to get people's attention, or you can pause after you've said something critical and you want them to let it sink in. I'm going to go through the rest of these quickly because we are at 7. This sabotaging your credibility is pretty much the reverse of everything I've already said, but I do call out this whole idea of words or phrases or sounds that are distracting. You know, right, like, so at the beginning of every sentence. You'll know it if you have one of these issues, and you definitely want to work to remediate that. Get those words or phrases out of your usage. And there are ways to do that. And then, of course, smile. In America in particular, smiling is a social lubricant. It's not like you have to grin like an idiot through an entire pitch or an entire presentation. However, people do react positively to smiles, and it helps warm up your voice as well. So I'm going to call that a wrap. This is the slide of how to manage a Q&A. So you'll have that in the slide set. And Don, I will send the set of worksheets that are the example worksheets that you can also post.
Good. Yeah, we appreciate that. Yeah, and like I said, after the session closes, after you close your browser, there'll be a pop-up survey that gets you registered for our drawing that we have at the end of the year for, I think it's a membership. I think it's what we decided to do. Just give some feedback, and then I'll get the registration information, time spent online, things like that, and I'll send RU's link to the YouTube recording that we just made, the slides and the worksheets. So yeah, that'll happen Wednesday.
If anyone's interested, I do have a weekly newsletter in which I talk about my blog post every week is something related to communication. If you're interested in getting access to that, I do post it on LinkedIn. I have a LinkedIn newsletter, or you can go to my website and sign up to become part of my email list.
I got a thank you for excellent presentation. Great presentation. Thank you. Thank you, Barbara. Appreciate. The only thing, I mean, I don't want to drag this, but I was thinking through life experience from when I worked at General Motors. We had several different contexts and formats for people to present problem data. I remember a 10-minute drill. You know, you talked about, tight time window structure. We had the 5-step problem solving. So the identify, analyze, plan, implement, and evaluate. And you would present to the point where you were located in the problem solving cycle. A lot of us use 8D. In the Toyota, what is it, the A2 form or A3 form, where it tries to fit all the pertinent information around an issue. And this is all about engineering problems. And that's what life experience has been at. I have a problem. I have to present my solution proposal and then get resources from leadership to get it solved. So that's kind of, I threw some of that stuff into the chat just for, and I don't know whether we'll be able to see that in the recording or not. I guess we'll see. But
yeah, I'm not sure either. But yeah, I'd love to have that Malcolm Gladwell book.
Yeah,
that sounds really, really interesting.
Yeah. Thanks for the excellent presentation and pitch delivery tips. Very useful information. Epic presentation from Moses.
Woo, thank you.
Yeah, you got it. Thanks, appreciate. So, is there anything else final in the chat? Very useful and well presented. So, Barbara, I think we're good.
All right. Well, thank you so much for having me. It was really a pleasure.
Basketball game, and
yeah, go watch that. Houston, who is it? Houston and not Duke.
Not Duke.
Exactly. We thought it was going to be Duke and Auburn.